Alright, welcome to another edition of the FantasyFix.com podcast. I'm your host, Brett Talley. We're here to talk daily fantasy strategy for June 24th, 2014. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at TheRealTal. Don't forget to sign up for Draft Street through the Fantasy Fix on the website to get your 100% deposit bonus. Alright, weather for the day. A couple of games with small chances of rain. Nothing I'm worrying about. At midnight or so the night before. Nothing that looks too serious. As far as good weather, good conditions for hitting. White Sox at Orioles is going to be about 80 degrees. Winds blowing out 10 miles to the right. I could see potentially using either one of those teams in a stack. Miami at Philadelphia, 78 degrees, winds blowing out 12 to the right. Both those games, Baltimore and Philadelphia, good ballparks for hitting, warm temperatures, wind blowing out. So maybe those teams will make sense. And then Detroit at Texas, which it's going to be about 85 here in Texas tomorrow night. And that game actually has a 10 over-under from Vegas. So you want to take a look at both of those teams. There's a game in Coors, St. Louis at Colorado. That's got an 11 over-under, so that's good for hitting. Other high over-unders, Yankees at Blue Jays, mentioned Chicago at Baltimore, and then also Cleveland at Arizona. However, I'm not really looking at Cleveland or Arizona because I happen to like the pitchers in those games. Cleveland's really struggled against lefties, although they've been great against righties. They're facing a lefty today. And Justin Masterson facing the Diamondbacks, who have struggled against righties. So those are a couple of cheap pitchers I'll probably end up using, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the stacks I did end up looking at, I took a look at the Orioles, as I mentioned, decided not to go, or no, I did look at the White Sox. I took a look at them. Rockies, as I mentioned. Tigers, as I mentioned. Also took a look at the Angels, who are facing Kyle Gibson today. Took a look at the Marlins, like I mentioned, Yankees, like I mentioned, Phillies, like I mentioned, Cardinals, like I mentioned, and Rangers and Blue Jays, like I mentioned. So those are the 11 teams I took a look at. When I ran everything through the steamer projections, compared it to cost, came out with 6 stacks I kind of like for the day, 3 cheap and 3 expensive. For the cheap ones, I like the Rangers against Drew Smyly. The 3 guys I really like there are Adrian Beltre, Alex Rios, and Michael Choice. The problem is Choice has been hitting 8, and it's too far away from Beltre and Rios to really stack them. If you do, you have to bridge the gap with Donnie Murphy, who's terrible, or Robinson Chirinos, who's bad also and costs way too much money. So I pretty much just ended up using Beltre and Rios in a little 2-man stack there. I think I did throw Anderson one lineup just because it kind of fit the price for what I had left, but just Beltre and Rios there, I think. Other cheap stack is the Orioles. I only put this in one lineup. Didn't actually love it as much as I thought I would. But if I'm going to stack there, I think 2 through 5 against the lefty Quintana is going to be Steve Pearce, Adam Jones, Nelson Cruz, J.J. Hardy. The cheap stack I really like is the Cardinals in Coors. They're facing a lefty, Jorge De La Rosa. So the last time they faced a lefty, they stacked their 4 righties, 2 through 5. Alan Craig, Matt Holliday, Yadier Molina, Johnny Peralta. Matt Carpenter has actually been fine against lefties since the beginning of last year, so if you want to use him too, but I think those 4 righties, or use him as opposed to one of those guys, but I think those 4 righties are a really good stack, a good price, and I pretty much had Molina in every lineup, whether I was using the other guys or not. Expensive stacks, cheapest of my expensive stacks, I like the Blue Jays. No Bautista probably, and no Lowry, but they've still got plenty of other options. They're facing a right-hander, and it is David Phelps. So there I like Reyes, Lind, E5, and Colby Rasmus. I could also say Lind, E5, Rasmus, and Juan Francisco. I like Reyes better than Francisco, but if you're using Peralta in that Cardinal stack, you can forego Reyes and maybe throw in Francisco. Other expensive stack, I like the Tigers a little bit. Austin Jackson, Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez, J.D. Martinez. Only ended up having them in one lineup. And then the Angels, going to cost you quite a bit of money, but against the righty forget who it is exactly. Kyle Gibson. I like top 4 in that lineup. Calhoun, Trout, Pujols, Hamilton. Expensive, but should be a nice little stack. So, refresher, cheap options, Rangers, Orioles, Cardinals. Like the Cardinals the most. Expensive options, Blue Jays, Tigers, Angels. Probably like the Blue Jays the most out of that group. Starting pitching for the day, I pretty much, for GPPs anyway, I pretty much took two tacks at it. The first one was Homer Bailey, Justin Masterson, Scott Feldman. And then if I was doing alternatively, I would do Kershaw and then Bailey or Miley if I didn't have enough money, and then throw a reliever with him. But anyway, love Kershaw today. Problem is he's a quarter of your budget. I'm only using him in GPPs when I'm going to throw a reliever in there. But other than that, Homer Bailey is the guy I like the most today. And that's in terms of points, not just value. I think he's a good value, but I think he's the second best point guy behind Kershaw, facing the Cubs, who have been almost as bad as anybody against righties. I think only the Padres have been worse. Mid-price options, like I mentioned, I like the pitchers in that Cleveland-Arizona game. I don't imagine a lot of people are going to agree with me on that, so that's a bit of a contrarian play, but those guys will cost you about a little less than 13 and a little less than 14,000. And then I like Scott Feldman as a really cheap option today at 9.5, facing the Braves, who have been really bad against right-handed pitching. So it's not a ton of pitching options for the day. I guess if you were looking for somebody in the mid-price range, man, it's really hard to pick anybody else. I mean, those are just the guys I like for the day. I could maybe see Giovanni Gallardo against the Nationals, who haven't been great against right-handed pitching, but for me it's pretty much Bailey, Masterson, Feldman, Miley if I'm not using Masterson, and Kershaw if I'm going to use a reliever. So good luck to everybody tomorrow. I will be back on Friday with another podcast.